Daniels Kononovs will be presenting characterizing the annual soil moisture and snow cover to better understand the hydrologic budget of a watershed in west central Alberta.
Okay, so my name's Daniels Kononovs. I'm a master's student at the University of Alberta, and my thesis is focused on characterizing the annual water budget for a watershed near Fox Creek in west central Alberta. I'm supervised by Dr. Daniel Lessie from the University of Alberta, Dr. Danny Dagenhart from the Northern Forestry Centre, and Dr. Christine Rivard from the Geological Survey of Canada. So the project objectives are to collect hydrological and chemical data so that we can understand the water budget and the impacts of seismic exploration lines on the water budget for this watershed that's near Fox Creek. So this data collection will eventually support the development of a 3D hydroecological model for the watershed, which I believe is in one of these subsequent presentations by Barbara. For those of you who are unfamiliar with where Fox Creek is, it's about 2 hours northwest of Edmonton. And in this map, the red boundary outlines the watershed that we're studying near Fox Creek. This area has been heavily impacted by oil and gas activities for the last 50 years. The black lines that are kind of running throughout the watershed are seismic exploration lines. And there's a total length of 2,300 kilometers of these lines that run through the watershed. There's also a lot of oil and gas wells and pipelines that are throughout the watershed. This essentially got us thinking last June on how we could assess the hydrology for the overall watershed and also the impacts of these seismic exploration lines. So when we were selecting sites, we used 5 criteria that we would choose sites with. The first one is that we would have this paired site model. We would establish a site on a seismic line and then another site that's going to be in the adjacent natural area. I'll show that in the next slide. We consider the proximity of our sites to NRCan groundwater monitoring wells, the soil and the ecosite types, the elevation, and the year-round accessibility. So here's just what the paired site model is. So in this picture, we have a seismic line that's running east-west roughly. And labeled 12A is one of our lowland sites. We would establish monitoring equipment on the seismic line. And then about 100 meters to the north of it in this picture, we established another site so that we could just compare the differences in the water budget between the two. So considering this, we ended up selecting 5 of these paired sites. And on this map, they're just separated based on ecosite type. So the yellow triangles are just, we had 3 of these upland sites, and the brown ones are 2 lowland sites. Now I'll just go over some of the monitoring equipment that we have installed on these sites. So the first is suction lysimeters or pore water lysimeters. These were installed at 30, 60, and 120 centimeters depth on all of the sites. And we're using these to sample the soil water so that we can analyze it for just the general geochemical analysis of things like major ions, pH, EC, anions, trace metals. And also we're doing stable isotope analysis of oxygen 18 and deuterium so that we could possibly fingerprint a source for these pore waters. We've also installed rainwater collectors. So there's 3 different types. In the leftmost one that's labeled a precipitation gauge, these are installed on all of the seismic lines so that we can monitor the monthly annual precipitation throughout the watershed. And we also have these rainwater collectors. There's a plastic one and a brass one. they essentially serve the same purpose. They're designed so that we can collect water samples that have minimal isotopic fractionation so that we can analyze for oxygen 18 and deuterium isotopes. So we've also installed soil moisture sensors. These were installed at 15, 30, and 60 centimeters depths. And the sensors are recording hourly measurements of the volumetric water content of the soil, along with temperature. And then we download this data from the loggers on a monthly basis. So just given time constraints, I will show one of the preliminary results just from the soil moisture sensors. They're pretty cool graphs. So here are the graphs from the soil moisture sensors. The left graph is the volumetric water content of the soil as a function of time, and the right one, the temperature of the soil as a function of time. So the solid lines are for the sensors that were installed on the seismic lines, whereas the dashed lines are for the sensors that were installed off the seismic lines. So what you can see right away is that on the seismic lines, the solid lines, the orange, black, and green ones, they have a much higher volumetric water content when you compare it to offline. And this would make sense because the seismic lines have essentially been cleared of any vegetation. So the rainfall can directly fall on there and you get more saturated soil. It's the same observation when you look at the soil temperature. The temperature is much higher on the seismic line because solar radiation can hit directly on the surface when you compare it to the adjacent natural forest. And these data actually also help with, I'll just turn on my pointer here. Here we go. So when we correlate these spikes in moisture for the offline sites, you can correlate them with individual rainfall events. So we can see how deep an individual rainfall event actually infiltrates. So for example, this rainfall event here, we have the 15 centimeter depth is the black line, and it went past that to the 30 centimeter depth, and then even past that to the 60 centimeter depth. Whereas if you look at the rainfall event right here that occurred about a month later, we have a spike in the 15 centimeter depth, but it didn't really infiltrate down to 60 centimeters, a little bit here in the 30 centimeter depth. And that is all I have. Any questions?
Great, thanks, Daniels. Matt, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Very interesting. Just maybe one quick question, and I'm gonna comment on something afterwards. Are the seismic line? I assume they are dynamite lines, right?
Yeah. So that's where they conduct their seismic surveys over. So yeah, they can dynamite.
Okay. So just you know, sometimes shuttles can be, I mean, deep, like probably a couple of meters deep sometimes, and so it can impact the shallow subsurface. And I'm saying that because some colleagues that are working with me in the Beaufort Mackenzie Basin, they discovered by accident that shuttles in the Mackenzie Delta were contributing to permafrost degradation and to methane expulsion as well. So I'm just pointing this out just to maybe want to know if it's something that you'd like to address, like the way if it modifies the, and I'm not an hydrogeologist, but the shallow subsurface or near surface water budget or whatever you want to call it, because it could modify the way water circulates.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So is it something that is of interest for you or your group?
I'm not too sure. We actually haven't talked about the implications of the permafrost and methane emissions from
No, but
shotholes.
what I mean is for you is like the impacts of shuttles for the way groundwater circulates. Because if you have a shut spacing, for example, of say 50 meters or something like that, or more, depending, and you showed a map where you have, I don't know how many lines, that could impact the way the groundwater circulates,
Right. Yeah,
groundwater flow, actually.
definitely interesting, but we haven't uh, really discussed that about now, so I'm not too sure.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Paul, you want to go ahead with the question?
That was interesting stuff. Do you know what age how old these seismic lines are?
So they range. Some of them are about 30 years old. I think the youngest one that we have is about 10 years old. But some of them you can't find ages for either. So
because one of the problems that people have looked at, especially in the boreal, and so it's a fair bit north of where you are, is that seismic lines there are compacted through the heavy equipment, and so I'm surprised that the volumetric water content is so much higher than the and so that sort of leaves me a little wondering what's happened in that soil. I'm not saying it's wrong data. It's not. It's just, is it that the compaction has stopped infiltration so that the soil actually stays saturated, as opposed to the natural where tree roots, etc., and long-term processes mean that infiltration just goes straight past 60 centimeters and keeps going. That could be the change. I'm puzzled as to why the results are so clear. It's given what one of the problems has been is compaction. So yeah, it's interesting though. I think that's really interesting data.
yeah, for sure. Thank you.